Good morning, everyone. Welcome to week 8. This week we'll be covering two different topics, risk management and negotiations and contracts. And then on week 9, the same time that you'll be doing your guest speaker assessment, you will also have a lecture for marketing. And I'm also going to throw in something about sustainability and green meetings, as they call them as well. So this week we're going to talk about negotiations and contracts. And these are the terms and the things that you need to know when you are looking into how you run an event or how someone else may run an event at your location, and some of the key terminology that you'll come across. So here's some key terms and policies. A walk policies is a guest holding room sent to another hotel because of overbooking. And often what happens is that people actually overbook their hotel every single night, if possible, assuming a few people are not going to be able to make it or they'll cancel last minute. There'll also be a cancellation policy, an addendum hold. Indemnification. Still didn't get it. But basically this is a clause stating that each party will not hold the other party liable should somebody hurt themselves, cause damage. So this is typically done between the two groups that are running the event, the host and the event coordinators. Attrition policy. So this is provides the payment to the hotel should the other party not fulfill its specified percentage of rooms booked. Usually there are minimums. So as like a wedding, as an example, you can have a room block of up to 40 rooms, but you need to sell at least 30 of them. And even if people don't get those rooms, the wedding, people who are getting married may be charged for 30 of those minimum rooms, just because that is what the hotel had to hold. And if you're holding rooms, you're not taking sales for rooms. So usually there's some sort of attrition policy in a lot of our contracts. There'll be a cutoff date. So at a certain point, you won't have those rooms held anymore. And then also a deposit policy, which is a percentage of funds that they need. And it's usually 90 days before event, 60 days before event, 30 days before event, and the day of. Which kind of brings us full circle back to how the roles and responsibilities of a meeting manager, which could be yourselves at many of your resort properties, or if you just work for an event company, what they entail. So one will be negotiate and finalize contracts, and you can negotiate, okay? Life is full of negotiating opportunities, so just ensure that the amount of money that you've been asked to pay for a certain thing, that's the best deal that you can get. So you negotiate and finalize contracts, you negotiate services and rates, you complete the contractual agreements within that contract. So there could be deposits or room bookings or whatever it might be. And then also you monitor to ensure all parties are abiding by it. So some of the tools that we use to develop contracts, and I'm sorry in advance, this is not the most thrilling material, but it is very, very important, and where you can really find yourself in a bad situation if you're not paying attention. So some of the meeting history. So this is a yearly conference at one of your properties. You should be able to look back and see what's already happened. What are the meeting objectives, which we've spoken about? What are the space requirements? Now, much of this, all of this stuff really, should be also on the BEO. So yes, there will be a contract, and that's like the legal and liability portion of the event. And the BEO, the banquet event order, should really show you all of the moving parts, which could be the meeting rooms that are required, the meals that are required, the amount of parking, how many rooms are needed, how many no-shows are allowed, the function spaces that are required, the off-site function spaces. So if there's not enough parking, is there another parking area and you're providing shuttles back and forth? And the meeting profile, which is the level of prestige or class of accommodations. So there's some things that you can negotiate and some things you can't. Food and beverage is obviously one of them. So a lot of times you'll have minimums in food and beverage prices. So they may want to charge, $4 per person per drink. You might be able to convince them that they could say, okay, how about $3 per drink? Or you can say, okay, I have no problem paying that $4, but I do want an upgraded selection. So I don't want Smirnoff vodka, I want Chopin or Belvedere or Stoli or something a little bit higher. Guest rooms, so there could be a discount off the published prices. So whatever your walk-in rate would be, maybe you'll say, okay, we'll give you 20% off the rack rate. You could get a complimentary hospitality suite or VIP upgrades. So if you are having well-known guest speakers or some sort of celebrity in that industry, you can get them their rooms for free. Free parking, turn-down service, newspapers, access to spas and gyms and all that stuff that you can throw in. Free room rentals with minimum food and beverage purchases, free room setups. These are all the things that you can negotiate. And usually you have to give a little to get a little, but depending on the business and depending on the place that you've chosen to run your event, or the people that are hosting it at your place, let's say they're having an event on an August long weekend, you can really ask for the moon. And if they don't want to, that's up to them, because you could fill your place no problem. So it's one of those things you really got to think about. Not only what is the event that's happening and the requirements, but also what is the business that we can get should this event not take place at our location. Would we really be losing money? There are 5 legal elements of contracts. So this is the offer. So this is the initial offer, the acceptance. The consideration is where you can go back and forth and kind of make some of those negotiable items that we spoke about. Making sure that it's recorded in writing, and then also there must be a legality component or a legal component to it. You must understand the proper way to revise a contract or proposal. Now, we don't go through that in this class. That's kind of higher level, but typically there might be a lawyer or you have somebody on your staff who handles that. And often what happens is it's both, if any changes are happening, both of you have to sign and date that you've seen the changes and you understand what they mean. Understand how to sign contracts correctly. Always define terms. So if there's anything that's in there that says to be negotiated, this could be also one of those things where you find yourself in a bad situation where you might say minimum prices for food and beverage will be to be negotiated. And you're having an event that you expect 200 people to attend and 120 people attend, just for whatever reasons. So your 120 people attend, you're missing 80 of your delegates or your people who are coming, and now you're paying for 80 extra plates of food and 80 extra rooms. So making sure those to be negotiated are negotiated, settled, and signed is really an important thing. And then understand how to negotiate and manage. This is also a big one as well, because people hate, there's this thing called price versus value concept or theory. And this basically means that no one's willing to spend a certain price unless they think they get the value out of it. And this is the key to relationships. It's the key to all business, all retail. It's the key to why Black Fridays and Cyber Mondays and all these things work, is that people think that the price that they're paying for a good or a service, that the value overweighs the price. So it's a $1,000 TV, but because it's Boxing Day, I get it for $600. So therefore, I'm getting a $1,000, the value of $1,000 for the price of $600. So both sides, and when it comes to negotiating, both sides should really feel like they win somehow. So you might have to give a little on one thing to get a little on the other. And you'll both have different ideas of what's important for you. Spell out terms of deposit. So this could be your 90 days, 60 days, 30 days. It could be whatever it makes sense. Understand option deadlines and the mailbox rule, which we will go over. Recognize and understand, this is the word, indemnification. And hold harmless language. Don't be responsible for others' negligence. So this is if one of your guests gets very intoxicated in his own room with his own alcohol and he falls off a balcony. You should not be the cause of that for that particular event. Understand the elements of a cancellation clause and the concept of damages, and understand the merger clause. Can be changed with each party's written consent. So there's a couple different types of contracts, some of which are more of a handshake and some of which are very formal. So A formal contract is often a problem. It's expensive. It's not very constructive, as it's generally drawn up by lawyers and people who are not involved with the actual day-to-day. So we often don't have these formal contracts. Rather, we have a standard contract, which is covering the legal requirements. It's the ideal situation where both parties will make sure they meet the needs of both the client and the person on the property. And it is the most common industry use. And also we have an exchange of letters, which is more of like a gentleman's or gentlewoman's agreement where you just shake hands. It will never work out in a legal dispute, but if, let's say, you book a party at a restaurant for 20 people and the manager brings out a contract, that's a lot of people that might scare them off a little bit, right? So an exchange of letters is basically saying, hey, this is our policies, just so you know. You look it over. We don't need anyone to sign it and me to sign that you signed and understand it. It's more of an exchange of letters, just letting you know in advance. These are some of the standard terms and conditions that must be included. So I won't go through all of these. This is just all of the ways of all of the things that could happen in a particular contract. Now, hotel contracts are often a little bit different than a lot of different events, because the hotel also has it's also running a business during that time. So it's not an event center that's just running a single event. Rather, it's a hotel, it's an operational business that may bring in different events, and they may even overlap each other, which can cause issues. So some things are a little bit different. So you want to accurately as possible figure out what the bed requirement will be. So very often as large blocks of rooms are reserved, then they're canceled at the last minute. So this is one of those things that you want to ensure that there's a minimum and you don't go too large on it. And you can always book them in after, should there be room. The main point to know is that what these conditions are, and ensure they are applied during the administration of the contract. So a couple hotel negotiating tips is to assess your needs accurately. Check the dates and number of rooms, etc., because often these are done a year or two in advance. So you really want to look at them and find out, okay, what is that date? What's it going to be? And check your historical numbers. So on that weekend, last year we sold a typical hotel room for a certain price. Were we overbooked? Were we at 50% occupancy? How is this going to affect our day-to-day business? Check their departure times and also the times that they'll need access to the room, because this could affect all your scheduling. It might cost you a lot more if they need to be in by 9 a.m. or noon versus a 4 p.m. check-in. If there's any group rates or free rooms or cancellation dates or other negotiable items that we talked about on slide 7. Exhibitor contracts. So you may have some exhibitors that are there as well. So as an example, you're having some sort of like a food and wine show at a event center. So you'll have like all of your suppliers, but you'll have like Labatt's and Molson and Diageo and Gordon's Food Service and Cisco and all these different people who sell food and beverage. So they'll want to know event information. When do we show up? How do we get there? Where do we park? What's going on? What's the timing? The floor plan or layout. So do I have a booth or an area in which I am supposed to go? How do the people move around? Rules and regulations. Can I bring in outside food and drink? Can I set up the night before? Can I give out away free alcohol samples, all that kind of stuff? And then how do you go through and book? So as to go into more detail, these are some of the things that they're also going to want to know, which I kind of spoke about already. Terms of payment, booth size, descriptions, access, when they set up and take down, and all of their rules and obligations for them. You also may have some sponsors. So a lot of these events are sponsored by a particular person, usually because they want their business. So in the past, our small Connect to Careers event was sponsored by a coffee maker, so Madison Coffee, Canadian Linen, and also by Blue Mountain. So Blue Mountain did because they're probably the largest employer by us, and they just want all of our students. And the sponsorship was $1,000. So $1,000 to them to get 40 or 50 or 100 great employees. not a big deal. The linen company and the coffee company are smart, because in that room, typically when we have a live Connect to Careers event, they would have probably, at least 100 of the larger hospitality companies out there, all of which have a huge demand for good coffee and linens. So when you think about that, if I work for a linen company and I'm a salesperson, so I basically manage the accounts, I'm going to sponsor an event like that. I'm going to walk around that floor. I'm going to talk to every owner and HR person that I can and tell them about the fact that our Canadian linen company is the best linen company with the best prices. And here's a special rate of today. So sponsors are great to have, but they also have their own expectations. So you want to commit the sponsor to a sum of money or services provided in exchange for sponsorship benefits. So sponsorship benefits for C2C was access to the employers, to inform them of their sponsorship fee is due, and itemize the sponsorship benefits they will receive. And in the contract, it should contain the name of the company, the event hosting company, and similar to an exhibitor, the event information, their schedule of payment, what they must provide. Often what happens is with their sponsorship, they'll get marketing buzz. So it might be on their webpage, on their social media pages, on any kind of advertising you might do. You'll have their logo or artwork or a little bit of information about them. They want to get their name out there. So in summary, and quite quickly, so please read through as you need to, and I'll put up a little thing with all the different terminology. Contracts are very, very important. Typically, most places that you will go and work for already have contracts, standard contracts in place that you will need to do as management. You'll only be doing the amending. So you'll just be, scratching out this policy or scratching out these minimums and adding in your own based on the different events. Most have a standard contract policy, and you can pull up the Marriott one or the Hilton one online right now. You want to understand the guidelines. Remember that there are 3 different types of contracts: formal, standard, and very, gentleman's agreement, gentlewoman's agreement. You want to approach hotel contracts with care. So pay attention to all the little details, especially when you're mixing overnight stays, traveling, and alcohol. You also want to apply similar principles to the contracts for exhibitors or sponsors, and just make sure you know some of the key terminology. Again, like I said, with this lecture, I'll also put up as much as I can for outside information. So another contract or some of the terminology that you might want to know about, and go through that on your own leisure. Now, next one I want to talk about, I forgot to change the date, is risk management. Okay, so risk management really involves this week coming up, because on Thursday you will have your next Thursday in class, you will have to answer a lot of questions on John Waite's what he does. And essentially what he does is he runs the Spartan race, which is a very grueling, long, dangerous event, which is a little bit different. But you obviously have probably heard of Tough Mudder and things like that, where you get all these huge groups together. So this is really bringing it up to another level. It's all across the world, across deserts and jungles and different areas. And what does he have to do? Because he is the event manager of a very of an event that happens that people are guaranteed to be hurt. So he has to make sure like helicopters and ambulances and people with CPR are there, because heart attacks, broken bones, Mexican cartels in one scenario, rattlesnake poison, venom, bites, all these things happen when he runs these events, which is crazy. So when it comes to risk management, essentially what we are trying to do is anticipate the risk to a meeting and event and its attendees and staff. Now, with the pandemic, you would also group that in with this whole risk management. So it's a whole different animal now. It's much larger than it used to be, where we really got to think, okay, what are we doing and what are the hazards and risks of this? So you got to know all the information and requests of a venue and supplier representatives, and you have to evaluate the level of risk and plan appropriate response and responsibilities. Coming from somebody who has had to give CPR and the Heimlich maneuver, sometimes successfully and sometimes not successfully, I was probably not trained if you can be ready for something like this. And I wish I had a little bit more training. And something like a fire drill that you may roll your eyes at, until the day actually happens that you need it, you'll be thankful that you went through those fire drills. So there's some things you need to understand. First is the hazard. So that is something that poses a threat to life, property, or environment. Now the hazard is the actual thing that could hurt you itself, versus the risk is the chance that someone or something will be hurt by the hazard. So this is more like, this is the thing that could happen, and the risk is the possibility of that happening. Generally, we break it down in a bunch of different columns: fire, medical, which is now going to lump in COVID-19, weather, labor issues, accidents, and the unexpected. So this is a risk assessment chart. Typically, I'd have you do an in-class assignment, but that's changed a little bit. We're going to be doing the guest speaker event. But this is basically a risk assessment chart for a hotel, and it breaks down a bunch of different things. First of all, it identifies the cause of the risk. It assesses the likelihood, 1 being low and 10 being high. It assesses the consequence or the severity of this actually happening. And then the risk factor, which also is the A times B. So the higher the number here, the more worried we should be about it. Then it should also say, what is the action to minimize this likelihood of event? So either minimize the actual results, so the hazards, or is to minimize it happening, so the likelihood. This is the action status, and this is the contingency plan. And sometimes you don't have a contingency plan other than just to cancel the event. And it's very telling and very ironic that the very first one, it says Outbreak and Pandemic. Now, I've used this chart last year and probably for a couple of years because it's a good example. And the assessed likelihood of a pandemic is 1, and it is a 1 or a 0. These things don't happen, but here we are in the midst of one, which is crazy still. So if before 2020, you would have assessed the likelihood of a pandemic or an outbreak as a 1. But the consequence or severity is a 9. So 1 times 9 is 9. You make sure you have an insurance plan, but really the contingency plan was nothing. If an outbreak happened, we wouldn't really know what to do. We would have to cancel the event, and we'd have no idea when we could hold that event again. Stormy weather. So a wedding on a golf course in August or September or the fall or the spring. Stormy weather happens. It's an outdoor wedding. These things are bound to happen. So the assessed likelihood is an 8, but the severity of the consequence is fairly low because really what could happen? At the worst case, yeah, I guess a lightning strike, but that is so rare. More so, could be flying debris, could be some damage to property, things like that. So you go 8 times 2 is 16. The action to minimize is the guest weather alert plan. So we'd alert them to all the guests. We could do some sort of pushing of time, but if as far as when the event actually runs, but if not, we might have to rebook the plan. Power outages is another one, not very likely, and if it does happen, it could be fairly serious. And food issues as well, not very likely if there's contaminated food. But as we've seen in some of the Caesar salads and some of the different mad cow disease and a bunch of other things that are out there, it does happen, and when it does happen, it can be quite serious. So what you would do for every event basically is set up a risk assessment chart. This will probably be more mainstream now going forward in our event industry or resort industry, whatever you might want to call it, as risk is just it's buzzing now. It's trending, right? So people are worried about this. Safety is an issue. So you'll have to be doing a lot of similar activities like this when you're in the industry. So risk readiness, making sure that you have procedures in place and they're included in the meeting resume for the event. and assistance is available to handle any other crisis that may occur. So I've gone through a couple things that could happen. So these are very common hazards that we talk about. So fire, as an example. So when you're doing a site inspection, now we did a virtual site inspection, not the same. A lot of these risk assessments for virtual events will be way different. When I think virtual events, the only thing that I can think of for risk would be viruses to your computer, potential of fraud or like stealing your IDs and your information, maybe some predators, like sexual predators online that are out there. Those are some of the risks that I would assume, but there's nothing really physical that could affect you. Otherwise, when we are back to our norm, these are ones that we would commonly be worried about. So fire, you should be checking to make sure that there's smoke alarms and fire extinguishers and sprinkler systems and evacuation maps. Often what happens, and I just heard about it this weekend, people have taken the batteries out of smoke alarms because they go off randomly and people die. And if that happens, you don't get life insurance. You don't get taken care of like you would if you have taken the batteries out of your smoke alarms and you have caused the death of friends or family or pets or whatever it is. They're not going to help you like they typically would. So be very careful with that. All your insurances will be void because you have voided them by doing that. Same with an outdated fire extinguisher. A lot of businesses probably have fire extinguishers, but a lot of them are probably not up to date. Severe weather. So be aware of seasonal weather patterns. We know winter storms happen. We know, huge thunderstorms come in the spring. Like this is something that we know. So making sure that we have an alternative in place should we plan any outdoor events. We've acquired insurance. We can even get interruption or cancellation insurance. So basically saying that if it does happen and it's canceled, we don't lose any money. And basically the insurance pays for it. And also you might need to insure guests maintain group rate if they need to stay longer. So a freak blizzard comes in and they can't travel anywhere, or there's some sort of landslide and the transportation can't move down the roads. Can they stay a little bit longer? Some of the medical services, knowing what you have in-house is really important. So do I have anyone that knows CPR and first aid in-house? By law, you always have to have a couple people on shift. How do you call for emergency assistance? Who's the available doctor or dentist? Where's the closest hospital and 24-hour clinic, and the closest pharmacy if somebody has an allergic reaction or something? This should be all just very easy information to find. So if you're working behind front desk, you should be able to pull up a piece of paper that'll say, okay, we got to call Dr. Wittenhouse, and he's the closest doctor, and this is the most available dentist. And here's the directions to the closest hospital. Here's the directions to the closest pharmacy. And then some other ones are demonstrations and confrontations. So this has also really been very topical in the last couple of years, been trending when you think about how many demonstrations and confrontations have happened in regards to, yes, the American president, but also anti-maskers, anti-quarantiners, pro-maskers, and them fighting amongst themselves. So even when we had the G8, I believe it was called at the time, in Deerhurst, I believe the political environment was a little tense, let's say. And there was people demonstrating and protesting outside Deerhurst and then all through Toronto as well, if you can remember back that long. It's important to understand. So ensuring that should you get wind of some of these things happening, that you contact police, that you hire security, that you maybe have to put up barricades, you maybe need to change arrival routes so they don't walk in the front doors where all the people are waiting, but walk in some sort of side door. You should know about this stuff and just have a plan just in case something like that were to happen. Mechanical issues. Now, this could be difficult to plan for because we don't really know when this is going to happen, but things like power outages, air conditioning, and heating do happen. Air conditioning in the summer, loss of that could be major, as well as heating in the winter, obviously. And same with microphone or sound system problems. You know, if you have an event and people are going to go up and speak and none of these work, it could ruin the entirety of the event. So what is your fix? Can you work around it? So ensuring you have the right people in place, people who know how to fix these things, or companies who know can come in and fix these things on a fairly short notice, that would be great. I stayed at a hotel that lost power in the summer, and I was the one that had to go down to the guest service little shop. It's a small hotel in Muskoka, and none of our water was running. You couldn't even brush your teeth. So I asked the guy for a bottle of water, and we had students staying. So it wasn't last year, sorry. It was probably like 2 years ago now. We had the tourism students staying there. And he gave me a bottle of water and tried to charge me like $6 for it. And I said, no, I'm not going to pay for it because I don't have running water in my room. So I'm going to need bottles of water for all of the students staying here. And he fought me on it a little bit. And then finally I just said, like, you're going to get yourself in a lot of trouble. All I'm asking for is like 4 or 5 cases of water, and I'm going to go put two bottles of water outside everyone's room. I'll go and do that for you. And I think he was only one person on staff. It was a smaller place. And finally, he just accepted it. In the end, they actually emailed me, thanked me, offered me a free night stay because of what I did, because he had no idea what to do. There was nobody else at the site. And it was one of those things that, you wake up, you need access to fresh water. Like, it's bad enough we couldn't shower or do anything like that. But even being able just to wash your face and brush your teeth and have a drink, it's pretty important. And then finally is speaker cancellations. So this is the moving people portion of everything. So you have speakers that are supposed to arrive. Their flight gets delayed. They can't make it. They come down sick, or they just bail on you. What can you do to change that? Now, speakers is important because this is also often the reason that people come. They want to hear this particular speaker, this VIP. So how do you pivot? How do you change? And how are you flexible with this kind of stuff? So go through, take a look at all of these, understand that these are some of the risks. And when we have our in-class pre-recorded guest speaker, think about these 6 things as you're going through his lesson. I will provide for you the questions as well. I did have an in-class, this stuff is for later, don't look at this, I'll delete it. There was an in-class risk management chart that I had you fill out in advance. I'll leave that there just so you can see what you're kind of missing out on. That stuff is marketing information. So this Thursday, 8 a.m. till 11 a.m., you must complete. You have 90 minutes to do so. Next Thursday, I will give you the video and also the 3 questions that will be asked in advance, so you're able to prepare yourself. There's no reason that you can't write the answers to the questions in advance, but there will be a certain window in which it opens. Then you could read the question, enter your pre-written stuff if you wish, or you could make changes and edit it as you go through. Other than that, I hope you all have a great week. It has been 33 minutes, and this week we covered negotiations, contracts, and risk management.